If you've been following the war in Iran, you've probably noticed that the past week has been one of the hardest to make sense of. One moment, the Strait of Hormuz is open. The oil markets are celebrating, and it seems like there's temporary relief from high prices. But the next moment, it's closed again and oil prices suddenly spike. And it's not just the Strait that's giving headaches to those watching Iran. Over the weekend, it was announced that Washington and Tehran will return to Islamabad for negotiations. But for almost the entire week, it wasn't clear whether this would actually happen, from who exactly would be on the negotiating teams to the talks themselves, because of conflicting statements, even from different parts of the White House. On Tehran's side, internal conflict also persists. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, or IRGC, seem to openly criticize Islam. One of Iran's main negotiators is Abbas Araghchi, the country's foreign minister. However, by Monday, there was a clear incident. The United States seized an Iranian cargo vessel that tried to defy Washington's blockade. Although the impact on geopolitics is still uncertain at the time of recording, one thing is certain. This war is not over, along with all the chaos that comes with it. But before we begin, if you're new to our channel, make sure to subscribe so you'll always be updated with videos like this. Hormuz news, as has been the case in recent weeks, almost all major news from Iran revolves around the Strait of Hormuz. On Friday, around 4:15 in the afternoon, Iran time, Abbas Araghchi said on X that the strait is completely open for the remainder of the ceasefire period, and ships may pass through the routes designated by the Iranian Maritime Authority. On his own social media, Donald Trump confirmed that the strait is open, but he emphasized that the U.S. naval blockade against Iran will remain intact and strict until an agreement is reached to completely end the war. In a separate post, he also said that Iran has promised not to close the Strait of Hormuz again and not to use it as a weapon against the world. According to the New York Times, these announcements caused U.S. stock markets to rise to record highs and oil prices to drop by more than 10% because many observers believed this could lead to a broader peace agreement. And that's where what's called dramatic irony comes in. But for the people who were in that situation last Friday, there was enough reason to be optimistic. That's because Israel and Lebanon had just reached a 10-day ceasefire agreement after a rare direct meeting between their officials. Under this agreement, according to the U.S. State Department, only the official Lebanese security forces are allowed to carry weapons in the southern part of the country. The Lebanese government is also expected to take concrete steps to prevent Hezbollah and other armed groups from carrying out attacks against Israel. Meanwhile, Israel will not carry out any offensive operations against Lebanon, but it retains the right to defend itself against planned, imminent, or ongoing attacks. Furthermore, the ceasefire may be extended beyond the initial 10 days if both countries agree, especially if Lebanon shows clear progress in strengthening its sovereignty against Hezbollah's influence. Although Hezbollah was not directly involved in the negotiations, it acknowledged the announcement and expressed cautious compliance with the ceasefire, even as it also released a statement criticizing the Lebanese government and reaffirmed its commitment to armed struggle. For now, the agreement appears to remain solid. According to the United Nations Interim Force in Lebanon, as the ceasefire approached its first 24 hours, Israeli airstrikes in southern Lebanon stopped, and there were no recorded projectile launches from Lebanese territory toward Israel. However, the peacekeepers noticed violations of the airspace by the Israeli military in their area of operations, as well as reports of mortar and artillery shelling in some parts of southern Lebanon. For Iran, this is a major victory in diplomacy and strategy because they made the simultaneous cessation of fighting in Lebanon a condition for talks with Washington. And they achieved this without having to go back to war. For Donald Trump, this is proof that his style of diplomacy is effective. Along with the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz, he had the opportunity to focus all his attention on forming a peace agreement on his own terms. But the strait did not remain open for long. Just a few hours after Abbas Araghchi announced its reopening, The Navy of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps issued a contradictory message on International Maritime Channel 16, the emergency frequency monitored by all vessels. In that message, they openly called Aragachi an idiot, insisted that the strait was still closed, and said it would only be opened by order of Iran's new supreme leader, Mojtaba Khamenei. Strangely, they said it would only be opened by order of the new supreme leader of Iran, Mojtaba Khamenei. Strangely, they would only open it by order of the new supreme leader, Mojtaba Khamenei. Strangely, they would almost never open it except for a new leader. The Tasnim news agency, which is affiliated with the IRGC, even released a statement calling Aragachi's post, saying it would only be opened for Mojtaba Khamenei. They would mainly open it to Iranian society, per the foreign minister's announcement. This is not what you would expect to hear from media outlets connected to a regime about its own chief negotiator. According to the Institute for the Study of War, the IRGC's criticism of Aragachi reflects a deeper division within the Iranian government. Conflicts that have intensified even more after the United States and Israel eliminated several high-ranking officials who previously served as bridges between different factions. But even though watching Iran seemingly attack its own official is somewhat darkly amusing, it's not a good sign for those hoping that diplomacy will lead to lasting peace. If Abbas Aragachi can't make concessions without being attacked by media connected to the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, it's hard to consider him a true negotiator. He's more like a messenger from Washington to the hardliners within Iran. However, it's also possible that we're just blowing the situation out of proportion. Iran has long been known as a country with various factions in power, and the IRGC is one of the most powerful because of its control over wealth and weapons. Tension between the military and the diplomatic corps is nothing new, even if it has just become more visible and louder in the past week. Some also believe that this kind of scene is intentional, a good cop, bad cop tactic to give Aragachi room in negotiations, while showing the hardline supporters inside the country that the IRGC still controls the situation. For now, it's hard to say which of these explanations isn't true, especially since Iran is strictly monitoring its internal communications. But even if what's happening behind the scenes isn't clear, its effect on the Strait of Hormuz is obvious. And that is pure chaos. Chaos. After all this, Iran announced on Saturday that control over the strait has returned to its previous state. The IRGC also added that the United States blockade of Iranian ports can be considered piracy or maritime robbery, and that strict control over the waterway will remain until Washington restores full freedom of navigation for Iranian ships. For some ships that were supposed to cross the strait, they were forced to turn back to avoid Iran's wrath. But others, including 6 cruise ships that have been stranded in the Persian Gulf since the war began, continued their journey. By Sunday, all 6 had crossed and completed their passage, with the last to leave being Arroyo Manara, after being stranded for almost 50 days. Others were not as lucky. 2 ships flying the Indian flag, including an oil tanker, were fired upon by Iranian gunboats. Because of this, the Foreign Secretary of India immediately summoned the Iranian envoy to the Foreign Ministry in New Delhi to formally lodge their protest. Ironically, India is one of the countries considered a friend by Iran and was previously allowed to have some of its ships pass through designated routes. For Iran, firing on Indian ships is a dangerous move because it cannot afford to make more enemies while it is already involved in an almost existential war against 2 of the most powerful militaries in the world. Iran's ambassador to India, Abdulmajid Hakim Ilahi, seemed to acknowledge this when he told the media that the relationship between India and Iran remains strong. But all of that was overshadowed by the most dramatic event over the weekend: the attempt of an Iranian ship to defy the U.S. blockade. Here's what happened based on the situation as of Monday morning. On Sunday, tensions suddenly escalated at sea when a guided missile destroyer blocked the way. The USS Spruance intercepted a cargo vessel flying the Iranian flag after it failed to comply with repeated radio warnings for 6 hours. According to the United States Central Command, or CENTCOM, the U.S. ship ordered the crew to leave the engine room before firing on it. In Donald Trump's simpler words, they stopped it right away by blowing a hole in the engine room. After this, Marines from the 31st Marine Expeditionary Unit boarded and completely seized the ship. This was the very first ship that actually attempted to break through the blockade since it was implemented on April 13. At that time, 25 other ships were turned away by the U.S. Navy. Without any incident, all of them complied with the warning. It seems that this incident was intentional to test how strong Washington's response would be if Iran tried to break the blockade. At the time of recording, the effects of this are still unclear. Iran called the seizure a violation of the ceasefire and threatened retaliation, while also announcing that they would no longer attend the upcoming negotiations. Although that's true, the discussions weren't really going smoothly either. On Sunday, in an interview with Jonathan Karl of ABC News, Trump admitted that what Iran did was a serious violation, but he still believes that a peace deal can be achieved. In a separate interview with Axios, he also said that the framework for the agreement is nearly complete. The issue of who is included in the U.S. negotiating team became even more complicated, especially whether J.D. Vance will join. Several officials, including Mike Waltz and Energy Secretary Chris Wright, said that Vance will lead the negotiations. But later, Trump told Jonathan Karl that Vance would not be going to Islamabad due to security issues, saying that the Secret Service could not secure the venue within 24 hours. After almost 90 minutes, the White House changed its statement again and confirmed that Vance would indeed join the trip to Pakistan, along with Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and the president's son-in-law, Jared Kushner. This repeated change is important because Iran does not trust Witkoff and Kushner. According to some observers, including Branko Pagbatan and the president's son-in-law Kushner, in fact, Iran has clearly stated that they are only willing to talk if Vance is across the table because even though he publicly supports the war, he has private doubts about it. From Iran's perspective, J.D. Vance is a more acceptable counterpart in diplomacy. But in the end, this might not matter if reports are true that Iran is not included in the negotiations after the seizure of the tanker. However, it's also possible that this is just a negotiation tactic. According to Kamal Haidar of Al Jazeera, reporting from Islamabad, there is a strong chance that Iran will still attend. He mentioned the extensive preparations in the city, including unusual security measures with more than 20,000 personnel deployed and large parts of the city closed off. This is a major effort for the host Pakistan, so Iran might also not want to embarrass them. But since the ceasefire is set to expire on Wednesday, time is running out for diplomatic games. This means we will find out very soon whether this is just part of diplomatic maneuvering, or if the ship seizure incident will ultimately push things back to war. Zooming out, if we step away for a moment from the conflict between Iran and the U.S., there's another important development: the possible conflict between Washington and Jerusalem. After the ceasefire between Israel and Lebanon was announced last week, Donald Trump posted on Truth Social that Israel is prohibited from conducting airstrikes in Lebanon. This is a remarkable statement from an American president, especially since Israel has long been an ally of the U.S. and is currently its partner in the conflict in the Middle East. According to Axios, Benjamin Netanyahu and his advisors were surprised when they learned about this from the media. The officials, including the Israeli ambassador in Washington, Yechiel Later, immediately took action to find out if Israel's position had changed. The Israeli government also formally requested clarification from the White House because the statement was allegedly contrary to the actual content of the ceasefire agreement, which gives Israel the right to defend itself against planned, imminent, or ongoing attacks. Eventually, the White House backtracked on Trump's statement and clarified that the ceasefire still allows Israel to defend itself. This incident showed something that observers have long noticed since the beginning of the war: that there are disagreements and possible tensions even among allies. The gap between Donald Trump's posts and actual American policy has become one of the most confusing aspects of the current era for both its allies and adversaries. Just in 2026 alone, There have been many instances where leaders and diplomats thought they had secured a concession from Trump, but he suddenly stopped it. For example, the sudden threat to take over and annex Greenland. And even though it is often directed at adversaries like Iran or even at allies in NATO, the most recent incident showed that even Israel is not safe from sudden statements on social media. Meanwhile, in other parts of the Middle East, the Houthis, a group supported by Iran and Yemen, are intervening more aggressively in the war. On Saturday, Hussein Alazi warned that the Bab el-Mandeb Strait could be closed. It's a very important maritime trade route through which a large portion of Europe's energy imports from the Gulf pass on their way to the Suez Canal. Because the Strait of Hormuz is also at risk of closure, Elizabeth Kendall of the University of Cambridge told Al Jazeera, if both straits are affected at the same time, it would be a nightmare scenario. It could cause severe disruption to trade through Hormuz. In other words, blocking these two routes is like Iran's last trump card. It's a clear reminder to the world that it still has the ability to make the situation worse if it wants to. When it comes to the economy, the attention shifted to the United Arab Emirates. According to the Wall Street Journal, the country's central bank governor suggested the possibility of a currency swap line to U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent. A currency swap line is an agreement between two central banks to exchange their respective currencies when needed. It's a way to ensure that a country has enough dollars when its own reserves are running low, and to prevent a wider economic crisis. Although the UAE has not formally requested it yet, this discussion shows the concerns of Abu Dhabi. Its economy and its reputation as a global financial hub could be greatly affected, especially if its foreign reserves run out and investors pull out. And it's not just the UAE that's affected. All over the world, the effects of the war are being felt, especially with the continuous rise in oil prices. This also causes the prices of basic commodities, including food, to go up. Despite everything, it remains unclear when this war will end. It's possible that the seizure of the tanker was what finally destroyed any hope for peace. Or maybe by Wednesday, we'll see representatives from Iran and J.D. Vance sitting side by side in Islamabad, forcing a smile in front of the cameras as they prepare for long-term peace negotiations. For now, all we can do is keep an eye on what happens next. Whatever the outcome, we'll continue to keep you updated. Thank you for watching.